What happened when an undercover CEO walked into his own school and caught a teacher breaking the rules? The answer wasn't punishment, it was transformation. Welcome back, brilliant viewers. Today's story isn't just about bending policy. It's about breaking down barriers. When one hidden act of kindness revealed a teacher's quiet sacrifice, the CEO had to choose between discipline and compassion. What followed reshaped the school's culture forever. If you believe that true leadership means seeing beyond the surface and using power to uplift, this story is for you. Stick around, because what happens next might just restore your faith in people. The halls of Melrose Community Music School were nearly silent as Elliot Green pushed open the side door just after dusk. Dressed in a faded gray hoodie, scuffed work boots, and a cap pulled low over his brow, he looked like any other part-time custodian clocking in for a night shift. In reality, Elliot was the CEO of the Harmony Arts Foundation, the nonprofit that had kept schools like this one running for over a decade. But spreadsheets and board meetings had started to feel too far removed from the cracked linoleum floors, out-of-tune pianos, and flickering hallway lights he now walked past. That's why he was here, not as a boss but as a quiet observer. He had heard troubling things: staff resigning, students slipping through the cracks, morale at an all-time low. The official reports showed stable funding and average test scores, but Elliot knew better than to trust the paper trail. To really understand what was happening, he needed to see it himself. As he passed the front office, he noted the broken intercom, the outdated posters peeling at the edges, and the faint mustiness of a building that hadn't seen a maintenance upgrade in years. The place wasn't falling apart, but it was tired, exhausted in the same way a burned-out musician plays one last note before silence. He walked slowly, listening. A soft sound floated down from the stairwell, a gentle plucking of guitar strings, tentative but soulful. Curious, Elliot followed the melody past closed classroom doors until it stopped abruptly, replaced by a quiet shuffle of footsteps. He paused, then continued toward the source. Rounding the corner near the storage hallway, he caught a glimpse of something unexpected. A small figure crouched near the rear exit, silhouetted in the soft glow of an emergency light. A guitar case leaned against the wall, and beside it, a young man knelt beside something Elliot couldn't quite make out, until he saw a tail flick, a cat. The man was feeding a stray cat, out of what looked like his own lunch bag. Elliot blinked, the moment catching him off guard. He had come to assess operations, investigate complaints, maybe even prepare for a leadership overhaul. He hadn't expected compassion curled up in a back hallway, purring quietly in the dark. Elliot stepped closer, careful not to startle the young man or the cat. The hallway's dim light flickered above them, casting shifting shadows over the tiled floor. The man looked to be in his late 20s, wiry with messy dark curls and a worn canvas messenger bag slung over his shoulder. He wore no staff ID, but something about him didn't say janitor or student. The stray, a skinny gray cat with a torn ear and hopeful eyes, was lapping up food from a makeshift dish fashioned out of a Tupperware lid. Elliot cleared his throat. The man looked up sharply, startled, his hand hovering protectively near the cat. "I know this looks bad," he said quickly, his voice tight with guilt, "but I swear I wasn't stealing, it's just leftovers from my lunch." Elliot didn't respond immediately. Instead, he crouched slightly, watching the cat, then looked back at the man. "Do you work here?" he asked calmly. "I teach part-time," the man replied, eyes wary. "Guitar. Name's Adrian. Monday through Thursday, evenings. I stay late sometimes to prepare for lessons or just to unwind." Elliot nodded slowly. "And the cat?" Adrian sighed. "She started showing up a few weeks ago. No collar, no chip, and terrified of everyone, except me. I call her Moxie." He glanced at the animal, now curling around his leg like it belonged there. "I know I'm not supposed to feed strays on school property. I just couldn't ignore her." There was no arrogance in Adrian's voice, no defensiveness, only quiet conviction. Elliot studied him for a beat longer, the gears in his mind shifting. This wasn't the kind of policy violation that showed up on performance reports. This was something messier. Human. "You know, technically, what you're doing could be written up," Elliot said carefully. Adrian's shoulders stiffened, but he nodded. "I know. I'll stop if it's a problem." Elliot looked at the cat, then back at Adrian. I didn't say it was. The moment hung between them, unexpected, unscripted. Elliot had expected mismanagement, indifference, maybe even apathy, but instead he'd found a teacher staying late to care for a creature no one else would touch. It wasn't part of the curriculum, but somehow it felt like the most important lesson being taught at Melrose that night. The next morning, Elliot stood in the administrator's office, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead and a stack of policy binders on the shelf behind him. Ms. Ryland, the assistant principal, tapped a pen against her notepad as she spoke. There are sanitation concerns, liability. We can't have strays on school grounds. I'll draft a warning letter. Elliot hesitated, hearing her words but still seeing Moxie's slow, trusting blink from the night before. He's not hurting anyone, he said finally. It's just one teacher, one cat. Ms. Ryland didn't look up. That's how it starts. Then others think rules don't matter. Then we have fleas, bites, or worse. A parent complains. The clash was clear. Policy demanded order, predictability, and control. Compassion, at least the kind Adrian had shown, operated outside those lines. It was messy, spontaneous, and often inconvenient. But as Elliot stood there, dressed in the same faded coveralls he'd worn while sweeping the very halls he owned, he realized something uncomfortable. The system he had built and maintained was beginning to fail people like Adrian. Not because it was wrong, but because it lacked room for grace. I'll handle it, Elliot said, voice low. I'll speak to him directly. Ms. Ryland looked surprised, but she nodded. As long as it doesn't happen again. Elliot walked out of the office unsure of how the conversation with Adrian would go, or what he would even say. Part of him still felt the weight of leadership, the duty to enforce the rules, but another part, the one that had watched Adrian share his lunch with a frightened animal, couldn't ignore what was real. People breaking rules for the right reasons. That evening, Elliot found Adrian in the music room, tuning a battered acoustic guitar while Moxie sat curled on an old scarf beside him. We need to talk, Elliot said, stepping in and gently closing the door behind him. Adrian nodded, already bracing for the worst. I understand. I'll stop. I didn't mean to cause trouble. Elliot held up a hand. You didn't, but I need your help. Not just with Moxie, but with something bigger. Adrian blinked. What do you mean? Elliot glanced down at the cat, then back at Adrian. This place has rules, but maybe it also needs a little more heart. Elliot didn't stop at the conversation with Adrian. That night he lingered near the staff parking lot as the last teachers filtered out. He kept an eye out for Nico, the name stitched on Adrian's backpack from earlier, now nagging at him with quiet curiosity. Eventually he saw him. Nico, early 20s, with shadows under his eyes and a posture that seemed too heavy for someone so young. He wasn't heading for a car. Instead, he walked to the side of the building, near the maintenance shed, and disappeared behind it. Elliot followed quietly, heart heavy with suspicion that was quickly becoming a concern. He found Nico unrolling a thin sleeping mat beneath a sheltered overhang, a patched-up hoodie pulled tightly around his frame, and a small space heater plugged into a wall outlet nearby. Moxie, the cat, padded beside him like a loyal friend. Elliot watched from the shadows for a few moments, his breath visible in the chilly night air. So this was the truth. Nico wasn't just feeding a stray. He was a stray himself. A student maybe, or a recent graduate, hiding in plain sight, doing whatever he could to survive. The pieces clicked into place. Adrian's late shifts, the extra lunch, the softness in his voice when speaking about someone who needed him. Nico wasn't just someone Adrian was helping. He was someone Adrian was protecting. The rules didn't cover this. No policy manual could account for a music teacher taking in a homeless young man and quietly keeping him afloat with sandwiches and a sleeping mat tucked behind a shed. And yet, Elliot couldn't find a single line in his heart that wanted to shut it down. Instead, what he saw stirred something deeper. An uncomfortable mirror reflecting just how distant leadership had grown from the people it claimed to serve. He walked away before Nico noticed him, but his mind was racing. Back in his office, Elliot sat at his desk in the dark, staring out the window, at the campus he thought he knew. It wasn't about the cat. It wasn't even about Nico. It was about a system that punished kindness for the sake of order. And it was time, he realized, to decide whether he would protect the rules or the people quietly breaking them to do what was right. The following morning, the halls of Briar Ridge School buzzed with routine. Bells chiming, students shuffling between classes, teachers hunched over coffee cups and lesson plans. But Elliot moved differently now. Still dressed in his custodian's uniform, he walked with purpose, no longer simply observing. He waited until the final lunch bell had rung, then stepped into the music room where Adrian was tidying up stacks of sheet music. Moxie sat curled in the corner, purring softly on a folded sweater. Adrian glanced up, surprised. "Need something?" he asked cautiously. Elliot closed the door behind him and took a breath. "Actually, yes." He stepped forward, reaching into his pocket to pull out a sleek ID badge, the one with his full name, Elliot Grant, founder and executive director, Briar Ridge School for the Arts. Adrian stared, lips parting but no sound coming out. "You're the janitor," he said finally, as if trying to convince himself. Elliot gave a small smile. "Not exactly." The silence that followed was thick. Adrian's face flushed with both confusion and dread. "If this is about yesterday, about Nico—" "Please, don't. He's not hurting anyone. I'll take full responsibility. Elliot raised a hand to stop him. "I'm not here to fire you. I'm here because I saw something worth understanding. And now that I do, I think it's time I stop hiding who I am." Adrian sank into a chair, visibly stunned. Elliot continued, voice steady but gentle. "I built this school to give kids a chance. Not just the talented ones, but the ones who fall through the cracks. Nico's one of those kids. And you've been doing for him what our systems failed to do. That's not a violation. That's compassion." Adrian's shoulders relaxed only slightly, still unsure where this was going. Elliot sat across from him. "But we can't help him in the shadows forever. If I step out of disguise, I can make changes, real ones. But I need your help. We do this right, we do it together." For the first time, Adrian's eyes met Elliot's with something new. Hope. The cat stirred, stretching lazily beside them. The moment felt like a turning point, not just for Nico, but for the entire school. Later that afternoon, Elliot called Adrian into his office. No longer the supply closet with a mop leaning in the corner, but the actual administrative suite, polished and sunlit, lined with portraits of past founders and framed articles about Briar Ridge School. Adrian entered hesitantly, eyes scanning the space as if stepping into a different world. Elliot stood behind the desk, dressed not in his janitor's uniform but in a tailored blazer, his posture radiating authority and calm. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing toward the leather chair opposite him. Adrian sat slowly, his mind still catching up to this strange new reality. "I'm guessing this isn't about firing me?" he asked dryly, half smiling. Elliot chuckled. "Not even close. I'm here to talk about your future, and Nico's." That got Adrian's attention. He leaned in, brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" Elliot folded his hands. "You've gone above and beyond for that boy. Quietly, with no support, no credit. That kind of commitment doesn't go unnoticed. Not by me." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a manila folder. "I'm offering you the role of student support coordinator. Full-time, with a raise and resources to back you up. Counseling tools, a discretionary budget for emergency aid, and yes, a formal way to keep Nico enrolled." Adrian's eyes widened. "That's a lot." "It's what you've already been doing," Elliot said gently. "This time, we will make it official. You won't have to sneak snacks into lockers or worry about someone overhearing a therapy session in the stairwell." The weight of it hit Adrian slowly. The recognition, the trust, the validation he hadn't realized he'd been craving. "And Nico?" "Stays. Tuition-free. And we'll set him up with a proper support plan. The school board won't fight me on this. Not when they see how far he's come." Elliot smiled. "Thanks to you." Adrian leaned back, overcome by the enormity of it all. "You didn't have to do this," he murmured. Elliot shook his head. "No, but I should have, and I will, starting now." At that moment, the tides shifted. What began as a secret kindness was becoming a sanctioned change. And for the first time, Adrian wasn't working alone. He had a partner, a leader, who saw him and was ready to rebuild the system with him. In the weeks that followed Adrian's promotion, The culture at Briar Ridge quietly but unmistakably began to shift. It started with little things: a new fridge in the teacher's lounge stocked with fresh fruit, a suggestion box that actually got checked, and a standing Friday lunch where faculty and staff could decompress together. None of it came from a board directive or a district memo. It came from Elliot and Adrian, side by side, reimagining what it meant to support the people who supported the students. Adrian's new role gave him access not just to funding, but to trust, and with that, he began helping more than just Nico. One afternoon, he helped a student whose parents were going through a rough divorce find a safe place to talk. Another day, he caught a struggling sophomore skipping meals and quietly ensured she had lunch vouchers for the rest of the semester. Nico, for his part, began to thrive. The once withdrawn student started raising his hand in class, showing up to school with a clean hoodie, and even joining the school's photography club. The difference was stark but not magical. It was the result of a safety net finally holding where it used to break. Other teachers took notice. When one of them discovered a student sleeping in the gym after school hours, they didn't just report it. They went to Adrian. He had quietly become the go-to for the hard stuff, the unseen stuff, the stuff most people didn't talk about because they didn't know what to do. But now they did. Elliot, too, found himself transformed. No longer the shadowy figure wandering halls in disguise, he now sat in on student circles and attended staff support workshops. He didn't hide behind policy anymore. He helped reshape it. With Adrian's insights, the school launched a pilot support program: flexible tutoring, emergency meal grants, and discreet counseling check-ins. What started with one cat, one teacher, and one moment of compassion was now influencing dozens of lives. Because real change rarely begins in conference rooms or on budget spreadsheets. It begins in quiet storage rooms, in small choices, and in people like Adrian who choose empathy, even when no one's watching. And now, the school was watching and learning. By the end of the semester, Briar Ridge Academy no longer felt like the same school. The worn walls still stood, the same morning announcements crackled over the intercom, and students still groaned at pop quizzes, but something essential had changed. It wasn't flashy or headline-worthy. It didn't come with confetti or a ribbon-cutting ceremony. It came in the form of quieter mornings, calmer classrooms, teachers who felt heard, and students who knew someone had their back. The transformation hadn't come from a district-wide mandate. It had come from a janitor who wasn't really a janitor, a teacher who saw worth in a stray cat and a struggling boy, and a shared belief that empathy wasn't a luxury. It was a leadership tool. Elliot Bradford, now open about his identity as the school's founder, didn't return to the shadows. Instead, he made his presence consistent, not as an authority figure looming above, but as an engaged part of the fabric. He met regularly with students and teachers alike, not to assess or audit, but to listen. From custodians to cafeteria workers, every staff member now had a direct line to someone who valued their voice. It wasn't about hierarchy anymore. It was about humanity. Adrian, once just a tired man with a secret and a soft heart, had grown into the role of campus coordinator with a grace no one expected, but everyone respected. His office was always open, not just to faculty, but to students needing a quiet word, a sandwich, or simply someone to notice they were there. He created an anonymous alert system, allowing teachers to flag concerns about students without fear of overstepping. The response from staff was overwhelming. Suddenly, help didn't just exist, it arrived. And Nico, the boy who'd once curled into himself behind a dumpster with a trembling cat, now walked the halls with quiet confidence. He had taken on the role of peer mentor, sitting beside younger students struggling to adjust, helping them navigate school life with the same compassion someone had once shown him. His cat Olive had become something of a mascot, her story of survival and second chances a metaphor the whole school carried forward. But the legacy wasn't just in programs or initiatives, it was in the mindset. Teachers started staying a few minutes longer to ask students how they were really doing. Students began to report when their peers seemed off, not out of obligation, but out of care. Staff meetings opened with gratitude rounds where small wins were celebrated, and when a student anonymously left a note in the suggestion box that read, "Thanks for not giving up on kids like me," It wasn't clear who the note was meant for, because now it could have been meant for anyone. That was the real legacy Elliot and Adrian built. Not a single act of kindness, but a culture where kindness was expected, where leadership wasn't just about who made the rules, but who broke them for the right reasons. A school where change began in silence and grew into something loud, lasting, and full of heart. The story of Elliot, Adrian, and Nico reminds us that true leadership isn't about titles or power. It's about presence, compassion, and the courage to listen before judging. When Elliot disguised himself as a janitor, he didn't just witness a policy violation. He uncovered a deeper truth, that behind every rule broken, there may be a story of survival, sacrifice, or silent pain. Instead of choosing discipline, he chose understanding. That choice rippled outward, transforming an entire school culture from cold structure to living community. The lesson is simple yet powerful. Small acts of empathy can spark meaningful change. Adrian's quiet care for a stray cat and a struggling student became a catalyst for something bigger. Nico's journey from invisibility to leadership shows that when people are seen and supported, they can flourish and even inspire others. Systems don't change from the top down. They change from the inside out, one choice at a time. Whether in schools, businesses, or everyday life, this story reminds us that rules are important, but people are more important. And when we lead with heart, we don't just fix problems, we rewrite the story of what's possible. That's the kind of legacy that lasts.